Good morning, everybody. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. My name is Joshua Layden. I oversee Bay Area programming for the Shalom Hartman Institute. I want to start with some thank yous to the Correct Foundation and the Walter and Elise Haas Fund for supporting our work here today, and also to Marcy Glazer and her team at the JCC. Thank you so much for hosting us. Our goal today is to provide an opportunity for rich and robust conversation around all of the various issues that stem from the Six-Day War and the last 50 years since the Six-Day War. We have a really exciting program for you today. We will start momentarily with Donniel Hartman, the president of the Shalom Hartman Institute. We'll then have breakout sessions. You can find inside your source packet the list of the breakout sessions for before lunch and after lunch. Those will take place either in Fisher Hall, which is down here to your right, or upstairs. And I'll tell you again where those are after Donniel's remarks. And then we'll join back here for lunch. And then in the afternoon, we get the opportunity to learn with Tal Becker. So this morning, we're going to start with a conversation entitled The Six-Day War, Rethinking Power, Land, and God. After Donniel's remarks, he will offer some opportunity to ask questions. As a reminder, for Americans, questions means standing up and asking your question, not offering an editorial. But we'll get to that portion of the program later. So it's really, I don't think Donniel needs much of an introduction, so I'm going to invite him up here to start us off. Thank you for being here.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's a pleasure to talk about an issue that needs reflection. 50 years have passed since the Six-Day War. How has Judaism changed? How have we changed? How have we changed for the better? And how have we changed for the worse? And what's so often the case is that it's precisely in those areas where our Jewishness has expanded that it is precisely there that it finds its new challenges. But any time you're doing a retrospective, it's important to make a distinction that the Jewish historian Yerushalmi made between history and memory. History is what you do when you're trying to give as accurate an account of that which happened. Now, there's no objective. Everything is through a certain lens that you wear. But still, your goal in the account is to find out what is it that happened and to tell the story of what it was that happened. Yerushalmi, as a historian, bemoans the fact that Jews very rarely do history. What Jews spent most of our time doing is memory. And memory is not about telling or giving an account of that which happened, but asking, what could I learn from that which happened? And then the goal is less about what happened in the past and more about shaping what might come in the present or in the future. So when Jews talk about the destruction of the temple in the year 70 AD, no Jews speak about the fact that the temple was destroyed because there was a group of religious fundamentalists who thought that God would provide a miraculous protective cover for the Jewish forces against the Roman Empire. We don't talk about the fact that we were a mouse that roared and got stomped by an elephant. When we speak about the destruction of the temple, we talk about Jerusalem was destroyed because of senseless hatred, or because Jews were overly legalistic and only followed the law, didn't go beyond the requirement of the law. Now, was Jerusalem really destroyed because of senseless hatred? Not at all. First of all, there is no such thing as senseless hatred. Whenever you hate somebody, it's for a reason. There might be unnecessary hatred, but the whole concept, but it doesn't matter. We like this idea. And what we do is we use the destruction of Jerusalem as an access point to think about when is it that we believe a Jewish society loses its right to be? When is it that you lose the core foundation that makes a society worthy? That's what you talk about. So here is, we took that destruction and say, what is the type of society that we want? When we thought about Jerusalem, we did memory, not history. Today, when I want to talk about 1967, I want to do memory as well. I'm going to be grounded in historical facts, but my goal is not to tell you what was experienced back then, but to ask, what were the forces that were unleashed by 1967? And how has it basically redefined Jewish discourse? Because Judaism today is a brand new Judaism, directly the result of 1967. And as I said, both for the good and for the bad. Sometimes the good is both in Israel and North America. Sometimes the good and bad is both in Israel and North America. And sometimes the good might be in one place and the bad might be in another. 1967 creates a new trinity in Jewish life. Instead of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, we now have power, land, and God. Each one of these principles was redefined by the 1967 experience. Let's start with power. Prior to 1967, for 2,000 years, you couldn't associate the word power in the same sentence as the Jewish people. Jewish people were a powerless people. We couldn't speak about our power. While 1948 was a good beginning, it is really in 1967 that the War of Independence is finally won. There's an armistice agreement in 1948, but it was still precarious. There were still 800,000 Jews. That's it. In the midst of a sea of 200 million Arabs who didn't want us there. 700,000, 800,000, it's nothing. Masses of Jews are coming. We didn't know whether we were going to have a viable economy, whether we were going to create a country, and certainly whether we were going to be able to survive. 1948, the State of Israel is formed on the basis of a UN resolution. The world approves our sovereignty. In 1967, we take hold of our sovereignty by virtue of our own power. The enormity of the victory begins a process that continues to unfold to this very day, in which Israel becomes the superpower of the Middle East. In fact, one of the 5, 6 most powerful countries militarily in the world. Who would have thunk? This little pishy people, half of whom were wiped out in the Holocaust, by 1967, capture the imagination of a world, not by virtue of their ideas, not by virtue of their ethics, but by virtue of their power. Power creates a new access point to Judaism, post-1967. Prior to 1967, why is it that you wanted to be Jewish? What was your motivation to be Jewish? Now, one of the motivations could have been you had no choice. They hated you, they were killing you, and just running away from them filled your life with much content and meaning. Not much joy, but you had content. The primary motivation was that there was something valuable. You were proud of the values and ideas that Judaism put forth. You could be proud of who you are, and when you choose an identity, it requires some level of pride. We were proud of what we taught the world. We were proud of what we gave to the world. power creates another access to pride. And it is an access to Judaism that has nothing to do with Jewishness. I want to be part of the Jewish people because for the first time, we're a winning team. Who doesn't want to be on part of a team of Moshe Dayan or Yitzhak Rabin? All of a sudden, Jews around the world stand up taller in ways that we couldn't stand before, but it is an act. 1967 and power give us an access to Jewish identity that has nothing to do with Judaism. In a deepest sense, the Zionist dream to create an Israeli becomes possible in 1967. I am an Israeli and not a Jew. What happens is that it creates that Israeli, but by virtue of an association of the two, also creates a new Jew. From now on, I could belong to Judaism through federation. I don't need to belong through synagogue. I don't have to belong through Torah study. I could belong by taking a trip to Israel. Birthright is fundamentally a post-1967 educational thought process, funded primarily by individuals whose Jewishness was redefined by 1967, none of whom were engaged in either synagogue or formal Jewish affiliation other than primarily philanthropic concern for Israel. I want to be part of this people. This is a winning team. You see it in the former Soviet Union, where a Jewish community, which was always marginalized, Sharansky speaks about how the victory of 1967 realigns his whole sense of self. The Temple Mount is now in our hands, he says. We hear this word. I didn't even know there was a temple, he said. What is it in our hands? But now there's something that's in my hand, and now I'm proud of it. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it means. I've never thought about it. And all of a sudden, he begins to see people treating Jews differently. Jews of North America, who prior to 67 walked very, very carefully, supported Israel, but were very, very aware of the powerlessness of Jewish life. Post-1967 begin to realign their sense of self in America. AIPAC and J Street are fundamentally post-1967 experiences where I could stand up and I could stand tall. And when Netanyahu goes to the United Nations or Netanyahu goes to Congress, and Netanyahu fights and believes that he could lead a world coalition against Iran. It's one thing for a president of the United States to think he could lead a world coalition. But when when Israel thinks it could lead a world coalition, it's a new sense of self. My place. And Jews around the world feel Jewish by virtue of wanting to connect to that power. And you go to Israel and there's tourist shops, which aren't selling Judaica. Tourist shops selling Israeli army uniforms. I want to come home with a uniform. I want to take a picture next to a plane, next to a tank, next to a soldier. It's not Torah. This is when really the sabra that Zionism spoke about, it is really fulfilled post-1967. We have new heroes, not Rabbi Akiva, and not farmers or intellectuals, Rabin and Dayan. This is who you want to be. Israel gives the Jewish people access to power in a way that transforms Jewish life. And every one of us, everything that a Jew has done, everything that a Jew feels post-1967, is a result of that newly acquired power. And I want to tell you, power is a phenomenal thing. Anyone who doesn't like power is usually someone who's been powerful their whole lives. When you are powerless, you realize there's no great holiness in powerlessness. Power is phenomenal. The ability to protect yourself. It defines such a deep sense of where Israelis are right now. The challenge, as I said, is that very often it is precisely in the blessing that we find the difficulty. Because power leads to pride. Pride leads to a stronger sense of Jewishness, a stronger sense of a connection to Jewish peoplehood. The challenge is that the line between pride and arrogance is very, very thin. When is it that you cross the line? When we sing the song of Rabin, what was it? Rabin Mechakel Nasser. What was it? Ay, ay, ay. You know, all those songs post 1967. Some of you are smiling and you're telling me your age, but but I remember the songs that we sang of like we're waiting for them and all the stories, etc. When is it that you become arrogant? When is it that power ceases to be a means and becomes an end? 1967, power is an end. Just feeling it makes you want to be Jewish. And we go to Masada, and Masada becomes really important because Masada becomes Auschwitz in Israel. Both of them are what power has redeemed us from. We're never going to have to go down that route again. And in the face of those dangers, it's an end. As something that gives you a sense of pride, it's an end. But what happens when power also begins to define the choices you make? What happens when power gives you access to a Judaism which might not always live up to the standards of the values of Judaism? What happens when power gives you a sense of identity? And maybe what you have to ask yourself is, what are the components of that identity? I know you're proud to be Jewish, but is being Jewish something positive and of value? A Jewish identity, any identity, a religious identity, is only of value to the extent that it creates a life of value. Does power create a life of value? Power creates the possibility to live. But now, for the first time, we have to ask, how do we use our power justly? Two areas which are self-evident. I'll start with the less self-evident. Does power become a catalyst for you to take chances for your values? Or does power become a catalyst for you to think that a status quo is safe and no one could threaten you? Now that I'm the most powerful country in the Middle East, do I want to think about what is it that I owe Palestinians or not? What is the type of Middle East that I would like to live in? And do I use my power in order to take risks because I know I have the capacity to do so? Or do I state, now that I have my power, I don't have to take chances? Who's going to push me? And that power could be military, that power could be in Congress. The status quo becomes something that power could serve, instead of power being a catalyst to go beyond the status quo to something which is greater. The case of Elor Azaria is one of the most significant cases which 50 years after 67, everyone in the Jewish world not only has to know, has to study and think and reflect on over and over and over again. Who here knows about Elor Azaria? Okay? So it's good I came. I feel that there's a... Elor Azaria, you're going to nod, is a sergeant in the Israeli army serving in Hebron, who comes upon a neutralized terrorist who had tried to kill an Israeli soldier and stab him, and he was lying wounded. 11 minutes after he was neutralized, Elor Azaria comes upon the event, sees the terrorist moving, picks up his rifle and shoots him in the head and kills him. Everyone in the Israeli military, every one of his officers up the chain, from his direct officer to commander of his unit, to up to the battalion, to the region, up till the chief of staff of the Israeli army, including the minister of defense, all say, this is not the way we use power. Because now, for the first time, We don't have to find out how we protect ourselves from power. Now we have access to power. A powerless people is always a moral people. You can't harm one. Today, post-67, we have immense power. Elor Azaria brings it down to one soldier to one moment. The army wants to put him on trial. 65% of Israeli society is against putting Elor Azaria on trial. I'm not saying finding him guilty. I'm not talking about what his punishment should be. 65% are against even putting him on trial. And the challenge is, do you love Jews or do you not love Jews? This is the consequence of 50 years after 67. We have the power. Does the power serve us? Does it just serve the basic survival needs of the Jewish people? Or does power create for us opportunities to ask who we want to be? For now, we have the ability and the luxury to think about these questions. Nothing divides the Jewish community in North America, and nothing divides some Jews in Israel from some Jews in North America more than this discussion on power. How do you feel about it? In Israel, we love it. I love it. Just to give you an example, and I'm saying this because I know it's going to make a lot of you feel creeped out a little bit or like weird. I have a gun. What, Jew has a gun? Yeah, I got a gun. I keep it in my safe. I don't have a gun to protect myself against my government. I don't understand your discussion here. There's something going on here that from afar we have great difficulty understanding. But I understand there is something that you're trying to protect. You have a right to protect yourself against something. I appreciate that. I don't have a right. I have a gun because I don't want to be a victim anymore. I've had a gun since right after my army service. It sits in my safe. Whenever I feel that the situation and terror is getting a little too dangerous, and my test is I'm a runner. Whenever I run and when I hear steps behind me, I look back. Whenever I look back, I know it's time for me to start carrying my gun. When I don't look back, I know I can put my gun back in my safe. I have a very simple system. That's my test. I don't want to be a victim anymore. I love the fact that power gives me the ability to protect myself and to protect my kids and protect my family. I want to know that if something bad is happening, I could help protect me, protect those around me. And so I carry it. When things quiet down, I put it back. I love what power does. I love the dignity that it gives to me. But at the same time, is power creating or removing from within the Jewish conversation the type of values discourse that is so essential to what Judaism is about? And that is both the case in Israel, Elor Azaria here, and very often within what is defined as the pro-Israel camp here in North America. When pro-Israel means an adulation of power, instead of asking, how do I use my power to a higher purpose, then at that moment pro-Israel changes and it becomes a divisive identity rather than a multivocal identity. How do you feel about that power? Is one first leg of the Trinity. A gift and an unbelievable challenge. And I want to tell you, in Israel today, the power itself is becoming increasingly a tool to serve the status quo instead of serving a values agenda. And that will create an unbelievable schism between Israel and world Jewry in the long run. Second leg of the Trinity is land. After 1967, the Jewish people become not merely the people of the book, we also become the people of the land. Now, Zionists always wanted to connect us back to the land. They wanted to return to a land because they felt that diaspora Judaism was too cerebral. They thought there was something perverse and sick about a people who thought that the essential act that a person should do is study. We have a body. Give me back my body. So the ethics of the father says if somebody is walking along the road and sees a beautiful tree and stops their learning, because obviously if you're walking on the road, what are you doing? You're learning. That's what a Jew does day and night. So you're walking around the road, you see a beautiful tree, you stop your learning and you say, oh, what a beautiful tree. That person is deserved of death. Zionist says, this is obscene. Give me back my trees, Berdyshevsky says. Give me back my body. Give me back a normal consciousness. Zionism wanted to create Jews of muscle, Jews who could farm, Jews who could connect to a land. There was a normalcy about returning to a land and not simply being on top of a land, being urban dwellers, disconnected from the normalcy of the universe. That was a deep part of the Sabra ideology. But the borders of the partition plan of 47 did not contain one single location which our tradition had determined was holy. All of Judaism's holy sites were outside of the control of the newly formed state of Israel. We had a few burial sites in the Galil. But other than those burial sites, we had parts of the Galil, we had some parts of the coast, and most of the land was in the Negev. The sacred sites for Judaism, Jerusalem, Hebron, Beit El, Beit Lechem, Kever Rachel, Shechem, all Jericho, not one of them was in the state of Israel. Post 67, as we capture these lands and Israel becomes technically the Holy Land again, the state of Israel becomes the state which is on the Holy Land. It redefines our connection to land, not merely a connection to laboring the land, but to being Jewish through the land. Because I could be Jewish through ideas, I could be Jewish through customs, through language, through literature. Now, I could be Jewish through walking where my ancestors walked. And identity is not simply about principles. It's about a feeling of a connectedness to your history, to your roots. And now Judaism could connect to me not through my soul, but through the soles of my feet. I don't have to do what Abraham did. I don't even have to believe what Abraham believed. But I could walk where Abraham walked. I could sit where Jacob slept. I could see where Rachel was buried. I could relive a 3,000-year-old history, and by doing so feel connected to that past and enrich my Jewish identity. Having the Holy Land creates a Jewishness of the land and a people of the land. In its secular dimension, it creates an alternative to Torah. The land, I connect to my past through my history. In its religious Zionist perspective, it also creates a connection to a holy land which begins to activate a whole new system of prioritization within Jewish life. Within the religious Zionist community, we begin a tension between the Judaism, the people of the book, and the people of the land. And post-1967, for the first time, the Torah of the land, as distinct from the Torah of the book, begins to be a predominant feature of religious thought, religious consciousness, and ultimately political thought. 1967 connects us back to our home. And people make pilgrimages to Israel, not like the pilgrimages of the past where you came to be seen by God, but a pilgrimage to my history. I experienced Judaism not in the bars of Tel Aviv. I experienced Judaism through connecting to the historical sites of my people. I walk there. And when you feel that 3,000-year-old connection, your Jewishness is expanded. Land gives you a new access point to Judaism that doesn't go through learning, doesn't go through a synagogue, doesn't go through prayer. Again, a profoundly secular experience, just like power. Both power and land expand the possibility of secular Judaism in new ways. And please remember, most Jews, in a deep sense, I don't care what denomination they are, they're profoundly secular. We believe in God most of the time, but God's not that important. And certainly worshiping God is not the thing that, other than on Yom Kippur when I'm afraid that it might influence my place in the world to come. On life and death, world to come issues, nobody, you might as well play it safe. But because that's Pascal's theory on why belief in God is rational. Because if I believe in God and God doesn't exist, then at worst I wasted some time. But if I don't believe in God and God exists, I will be condemned to eternal damnation. Therefore, it is rational to believe in God. That is basically a motivating factor for much of our high holiday services. No, we all show up on high holidays, and we actually have a belief. And this goes back to Isaiah chapter 58, when the Jewish people said, God, we just fasted for 25 hours. Please bring the Messiah. That's what Lama tzamnu v'lo ra'ita, ininu nafshenu v'lo shamata. Like we fasted for nothing. 25 hours of not eating is? I think I need a redemption. And we thought, so there is a very strong sense that if I do this for God, God owes me. But other than that, Jews we're not as faithful, by and large, as Christians and Muslims. We're not. Both power and land give us a Jewish identity which is full, exciting, connects us to our past. And that is a great blessing. At the same time, just like power, power could lead to pride and power could lead to arrogance. Land could also become an end unto itself. And 50 years post-1967, you see a process of the normalization of our connection to land, in which land is slowly but surely becoming an end unto itself. The fact that you cannot declare that most Israelis today, it is not certain that they want a two-state solution. If they do, the majority, it's 52%, and it might be 48%. It's not 78% of the Oslo Accord. The majority do not want a two-state solution, or it's a small, slim majority. And when they're asked, are you willing to dismantle settlements, it goes down to the mid 20%. Part of it is a consequence of our experiencing Palestinians saying no to our peace offerings. Part of it is the result of the fact that the majority of Israelis do not think that a peace treaty is possible. They don't fully buy into President Trump's aspiration to complete a deal in 9 months. Somehow they feel that it might be a little more difficult than that, and how we deal with that reality is going to be an interesting, it'll require a slightly more longer attention span, and we'll have to see. Listen, that's your politics, not mine. But Israelis, it could be that it's for that reason. But it's also because of the connection to the land. Gush Emunim thrives, the settlement movement thrives under secular Israeli governments. Because secular Israelis, even if they don't want to live in Hebron, are connected to the land. And they see the settler movement as reflecting that ideology, which they hold in a secular sense. But what makes it more complicated is when it is in a secular sense, it connects to nationalism. And in theory, you could bring forth Jewish values and say, well, I have a value that's higher than this value. Peace, safety, life, human rights might be more important than land. But when land in this trinity gets connected to the religious Zionist movement, which is a core Israeli feature. It exists also among American Orthodoxy, but it's more significant amongst the Israeli religious community. Now, land becomes a religious value. And if the values of Torah compete with the values of land could win. And all of a sudden, if I give up the land, it's like I'm destroying God. I'm destroying the most significant principles of my tradition, and therefore it is halachically forbidden for me to have any territorial compromise. What does that mean about the Palestinians? It doesn't matter. I am a people of the land. A new feature, a new elephant, a new weight is shaping Israeli discourse. A third, or possibly a half even, of the Likud party are against a two-state solution. And they do so principally because of their connection to the land and not principally because of their security concerns. How do we begin to manage this land 50 years afterwards? We've also gotten used to it. This is my land. How do you give back that which you now hold? What possibilities does the future provide and allow? 50 years after 67, we now have control of holy sites. We now have defensible borders. But land is also becoming an end unto itself. And the last is God. Not only are most Jews, deeply secular, one of the reasons for us being so secular is that for most of our history, God has been a problem. Because Woody Allen was right. God is an underachiever. Or at least when it comes to Jews. When it comes to us, what have you done for me lately? You take me out of Egypt. You promise me that you're going to be with me. You choose Abraham, thank you very much. And you say, I will make of you a great nation, and I'll look after you and protect you, and everything's going to be phenomenal. But life is not working out that way. For Jews, God, when you just mention God, it is a problem which needs an answer. Where are you? Christianity says there's no problem, you just don't want the answer. The answer is God what? Left you. Whoever wins, wins because of God. Jews, you're losing. Get the message. And Jews basically have to contort their theology, have to struggle with how do I explain history? How do I figure this out? Why is it that the God who ostensibly loves me, how do I keep my connection to Torah alive without thinking that it has basically been replaced by a new Torah? And it's not that I have a problem with Judaism, I have a problem with the way God delivers. And God is not delivering. So we create brand new theologies. God is the most powerful God, but how do you express power? By controlling your impulses. Thank you. I don't want God to control God's impulses. I want you to get them. Job is something that every human being experiences at some time in their life. All of us, ladies and gentlemen, we all have pekalach. Every one of us has little packages. Moments of pain and suffering and sadness. People who we love. People who just did not deserve what life, the lot that life gave to them. Every one of us has to deal with moments where we don't understand. And Job basically says, a human being is not capable of understanding and answering these questions. And all of us could understand that inherent with the idea of God is the notion that there is something that transcends my understanding. We could have, that's part of the story. Job is absolutely correct. But that can't be you can't sustain a Jobian ideology for 2,000 years. For 2,000 years, you can't say God loves me, but I just don't understand at all what God wants and how God thinks. The dissonance is very, very deep and profound. But Jews somehow succeeded in maintaining it and sustaining their identity in impossible circumstances. 1967 and its victory changes all of it. For the first time in 2,000 years, history, instead of being a problem for Jews, becomes evidence of God's love for us. Now, it begins in 1948, but in 1948 it's only a partial victory because 1948 comes after what? The Holocaust. So how much theologizing of history could you do after half the Jewish people? Oh, what a great moment. God just saved the... So, save the Jewish people, and you just go on. But you remember. So is God the God of Auschwitz or is God the God of 48? Which God? You're not sure yet. What's the God that we're going to have? You don't really feel comfortable with history, and God is still something which you can figure out. And if you can figure something out, you might as well leave it aside and deal with those things that you can figure out. What's unique about 67 is that our victory doesn't come after a defeat, but it actually prevents what many Jews felt was going to be the second Holocaust. 67, after the 3 weeks before 1967, when the world started to do the same story again, United Nations is pulled out of Sinai, Arab nations are all converging on Israel. The Jewish world feels a second Holocaust is about to happen. Our primary ally, France, starts to do an arms embargo. We're not even going to have the bullets to defend ourselves. It's just not going to be. This is, can we survive a second Holocaust? And not only do we not have a Holocaust, it's not that it comes after a Holocaust, but the victory prevents a Holocaust. This is truly the Exodus from Egypt. And a very famous joke in Israeli society, some of you Israelis will know, about the kid who talks about the victory in 1967, about a soldier who comes back and says, what happened? What happened? How did you do all of this? What happened to you? You yourself captured. He says, oh, you wouldn't believe what happened. I was facing a bunch of Egyptians, and all of a sudden, locusts came out from the sky. And as the locust was coming, darkness came all over, and they couldn't see, and only we could see, etc., etc. And someone says, is that really what happened? And they say, no, but if I would tell you what happened, you wouldn't believe it. So Egypt becomes the simple miracle versus the real miracle of 1967. After 1967, his history becomes that which we could theologize. We could see God's hand in history. We could say, yes, there is a miracle. Jewish religious conversation is transformed post-67 because we don't only have to explain our failures and how God might still be loving us despite the fact that God seems to show that love by killing us. And it's a complicated story. Now, as a powerful people, power meets God, and God comes back into Jewish history. Now this has a most profound impact, on one level, on secular Jews all over the world. There is a sense whereby when you go to Israel, the holiness of Israel, it's not just the holiness of its history, it's also the God presence in its story. And you feel that connection. There's something happening here. I am closer to a miracle than I've ever been before. But in the religious Zionist community, it activates a completely different impulse. Now, instead of having to explain why history was what it is and the problem, now I could look at the success and say, this is what God wants of me. And now when I do politics, I could actually bring God into the conversation. Beforehand, God helps those who help themselves. Now it is my God to hear it is my job to hear what it is that God wants of me and to follow what it is that God wants. I have to be in the service of God. If early Zionists spoke about that Zionism was the beginning of the Messianic era, post-67, religious Zionism speaks about Israel as being the Messianic era. The Messiah is here. And now the superpower is us, not because of our power alone, but because God is on our side. So who are you going to listen to? To an American president, to a Russian president, to the United Nations, or to the will of God as it is unfolding in history? This is Egypt. Point 2. When you're living in a Messianic era, what influences you and what does not changes completely. Jews were always profoundly practical because reality was very difficult. And we were taught you don't count on miracles. Now, a miracle is the essential engine of our success. How do you do politics in that context? Power, land, and God. 67 changes the conversation. Every one of us, even if we didn't know it, grow up in a Jewish world where there are new avenues of experiencing Jewishness that we didn't have before. There are new opportunities, both secular and religious, to engage in our Jewish identity. 50 years after 67, however, we as a people have to ask ourselves, what are going to be the memories of 67? Not merely what forces it unleashed, but what are the forces that we want to control, which will shape the next 50 years? These are questions both within Israel and within North America. But in many ways, as I stand here today here, I feel that post-67, Israel is increasingly telling one story, and American Jewry is increasingly telling another. If we're going to have a shared future together, we have to come up with a way of shaping the impact of 1967 on our consciousness. I love power, but power cannot be an end. I love power, but we have to avoid slipping into arrogance, whether in Israel or in North America. I love access to the land, but what does it mean to develop a Judaism that thinks very carefully about the relationship between our values and land and asks what are the true important priorities? We never had to compete. We never had a counter Torah to the Torah of Sinai. Now we have a Torah of Zion, a Torah of the land. And what is that Torah? And do you identify that Torah? And which comes first and when? And how do we Jews create a community where for some God is marginally important, and for others God is speaking to them every single day through the successes of Israel, and the political discourse is transformed? Can we talk with each other? In short, how do we make sure that the memory of 1967 is a blessing and not a curse, is one of the central questions that we have to ask ourselves today as we celebrate and reflect on 50 years since 1967. Thank you. And now, if there's any questions, please. We have about 10 minutes for questions. Yes, please. I can see, so hi.
We're all absorbing your wonderful words. That was just inspiring. So thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
I guess my question would be back to this bifurcated Torah discussion. So we have the Torah of Judaism and religious Torah, and you're talking about the Torah of the land, which is not a term I'm familiar with. So perhaps you can talk about that bifurcation a little bit, because I didn't quite get it.
Okay, yes. Thank you. The Torah of the land says holding on to the holy sites of Judaism is an obligation unto itself. And even if the Torah says you shall love the stranger as yourself, what's hateful unto you do not do unto others, various principles that might require you to accommodate Palestinian rights, deal with them, reflect on them. The Torah of the land says holding on to Beit Lechem, holding on to Hebron takes precedence. If you want to see the conflict between the Torah of Sinai and the Torah of the land, go to Hebron. Who here has been in Hebron? Nod if you know what I mean. Just go. It's right there. That is ground zero of the conflict between the two. And when in order to enable the Jewish people access to our holy sites, and in order to enable, 300-400 families to live, what are the consequences of doing that? And what is the claim of that Torah? And you have to realize, Hebron is not sustained by the 300-400 families who live there. It's sustained by a country which uses the term, Hebron is Sela Mechtzavenu. Hebron is the rock of our foundation. How could we have Israel without Hebron? From my perspective, quite easily. But I know that's heretical in certain sites and in certain locations. I know I can get away with it in San Francisco. I'm on my home turf here. Because I hear the other Torah. In Israel, which is not grounded on the principle of what is hateful unto you, do not do unto others, is not a Jewish state. But for others, the Torah of the land dominates the Torah of Hillel. Which Torah is going to win? And what makes it so difficult is I can't shame them. I can't say, what's wrong with you? What Judaism? They say, look at me, what are you talking about? This is Judaism. We have a cultural war between the Torah of Sinai and the Torah of the land going on in Israel right now. And how it's going to be answered is going to determine our future. And that cultural war was unleashed by 1967. Does that? Thank you. Yes, please.
You said that the majority of Israelis don't favor a two-state solution.
Correct.
I'm curious what the majority of Israelis do favor.
They don't know. Sure. You said that the majority of Israelis don't favor a two-state solution. What do the majority of Israelis favor? And my answer is we don't know. Israel, there is no politician in Israel, and I'm not talking about Netanyahu, whether it's Bennett, Netanyahu, Lapid, Herzog, or those who might replace him. None of them are providing a vision. None of them talk about values. None of them talk about a two-state solution. None of them say this is where we need to go. When Yair Lapid wanted to really go on the edge, he gave a line such as, we have to build a wall so that we don't have to see them. That's as far as you can go right now. That was, what a peace-loving statement. The problem is, and this is a much larger conversation, is that we have been trained for the last 15 years to believe that a two-state solution is basically a divorce treaty. That Israelis and Palestinians hate each other, and we have to get divorced so that Israel will be a democracy and you can do whatever you want to do. I just want to get divorced from you. That's what we do in 2005 with the unilateral withdrawal from Gaza. It was a divorce treaty. But the thing that we learned post-Gaza is that you can't get divorced in our neighborhood because you're still living in the same house. And consequently, you could get divorced, but they could fire missiles at you. They could still throw plates at your face, break your house down. And therefore, the problem is that we have been trained now for 15 years to look for a divorce treaty, a divorce arrangement, when in fact a two-state solution has to be a marriage. But no, in the context, post-Gaza, it's a marriage. It has to be coexistence. It has to be grounded on mutual respect and mutual care. It has to have mutual interests where we help each other. But that's the only thing that might work. The two populations aren't interested in marrying each other. They want to get divorced, but a two-state solution requires a new marriage. And that leaves you with an Israeli society, frankly, which can't articulate intelligently what it is that they want. So when a recent survey, 48% say they want a two-state solution. When they're asked, what do you mean by a two-state solution? Do you know you're going to have to dismantle settlements? They say then it goes down to the mid-20s. When they say, but we will take Wadi Ara and El-Fachem, which is part of the lower Galil, where there is about 125,000 Arabs, and say, we're going to take that Arab settlement city and put it into the West Bank, because it's near Jenin, then it goes up to 50. So now if they're suffering from it too, I showed that. So it's like they're completely lost. It has nothing to do with vision. It has to do with power and anger and fear and frustration, and a lack of a society talking about we have two societies, talking about how do we live together in a two-state solution, not how we get divorced, and consequently political discourse in Israel is basically nowhere right now. Last, yes, please. Oh, we have last two, and then, yes, please. Those are two.
For many years, I was a professional Zionist, and I'm not being paid to be a Zionist anymore, but I still feel like I do it as a job. And I often find it difficult to open the conversation with someone who is Jewish, who wants to support Israel, and they find all these reasons not to. And one of the reasons used to be, Bibi is so horrible. These people who could elect Bibi, how can I support them? They can't have the values that I share. And I'm not stating my opinion, I'm stating things that people tell me. Yeah. And I used to work so hard to try and answer that question just to be able to start the conversation. Now I feel like it's a little bit easier because I can say to people, do you agree with Trump? Well, our country elected Trump. So if you don't believe that we should have elected Trump, then you don't believe in America. What is kind of some of the lines that I can use to start the dialogue, to open up the conversation, to let people believe that they can be pro-Israel even if the leader of that country does not share their values?
Again, it will depend on the Jewish community. Thank you for that question. It's when we create here, both in Israel or in North America, a place for a Zionist conversation that is grounded on values, the people who you're reaching to have an entry point. Is the entry point the political system, or is the entry point a conversation about the Israel that we want and the Israel that ought to be? One of the motivating factors for the Institute to engage in these 1967 conversations is to recognize that 1967 has become the problem, but it could also begin to be part of the solution. Let's reclaim the conversation. Let's talk about power, but together with moral responsibility. Let's talk about the benefits of the land, but the land as circumscribed by other values. Let's talk about what 67 did for us and what Zionism can mean, but we can't allow somebody to define and control what Zionism has to mean for me. It might be what it means for you, but that means that we in North America have to be far more aggressive in creating a North American Zionist conversation, which is not necessarily led by Israelis, or not Israelis, by Israel. Could be led by Israelis, but not by Israel. North American Zionism might be very different from Israeli Zionism. And one of the great challenges that we're going to face is whether North American Zionists are going to fight to change Israel or not. Because if they don't, then there is no place for a North American Zionist, because then you're just a spectator on a game that you don't even like. You know, like I had this great dilemma. Many of us who are basketball fans have this great dilemma as we're watching the finals or they're boring. Like I just turned the channel. I made a mistake. I turned the channel yesterday, and I didn't realize that miracles happen in our lifetime. No, it's just boring. It's like, who wants to watch a game that you don't like? It's like there's nothing going on, or if it's going on, it's worse. It's just, it's like, why have it? But if you have yours and you're fighting for it, what people could connect to is your Zionism. Who said that Netanyahu has, and by the way, how you define Netanyahu is a separate issue. Who says that what's going on there has a monopoly over Zionism. Again, last question, but just one line. My father always taught me, and this was one of his cardinal rules: Israel is too important to leave to Israelis.
All right, so I want
Last
to,
question.
Donniel, I'm actually going to cut us off.
It's okay.
I'm sorry.
I have one more.
Okay.
That's fine. Yes, please.
Given the complexities of the situation, can you imagine there can be a democratic Jewish state in which both the Israelis and the Palestinians could be satisfied with the outcome in the future?
Could I imagine? Sure I can. I imagine coming back to Jerusalem for 2,000 years. My capacity to imagine is unlimited. But, and actually, part of our responsibility is to continue to imagine that which looks very, very difficult. It's not hard to imagine, but it's not going to come by a deal signed by Saudi Arabia with American support. It's much more complicated than that. Israeli society and Palestinian society hate each other right now. They don't care about each other. In Palestinian society, Jewish lives don't matter, and in Israeli society, Palestinian lives don't matter. That's as far as we've gotten. We just don't care, and we've earned our mutual derision. It hasn't just happened, we've earned it. We've worked on it, and we've worked on it, and we've earned it. That reality needs to be healed. And it's not going to be in 9 months or a year. It's going to be, instead of looking for the deal, it's going to be asking, what are the real steps that need to be taken in the next year, in 2 years, in 5 years? And in 5 years, if we do what we need to do, we might be able to activate a tipping point. But it's going to be because I'll speak now as an Israeli Jew. It's because I, as a Jew, want a Palestinian state, not because I want a Jewish democracy. The peace camp made a major, major error 10, 15 years ago, when they realized that since Israelis stopped caring about Palestinian rights, we started to talk about peace as necessary to sustain a Jewish democracy. Jewish democracy basically says, I need to have peace for my own interests. Because I offered and you said no, a plague on all your houses. Plague on all your houses. And we stopped talking about how do Palestinian rights obligate me? So we said, you know what? We need a Jewish democracy. So guess what people say? Jewish democracy in the Middle East, all I have to do is be the best democracy in the Middle East. It doesn't have to be perfect. And that's a pretty low standard to be the best democracy in the Middle East. I can't be. In the Middle East, I don't get to be a perfect democracy. And as a result, we shifted our vision. And so right now, we're nowhere, both in Israel and amongst Palestinian society. I could envision an Israel and a Palestine living side by side in peace and security with profound cooperation and beautiful relationships with each other. But we have to have the courage to do the long and difficult work necessary to get there. It was a pleasure being with you today. Thank
you, Donniel. I just want to give a little bit of direction. Our goal today was to have a conversation that is both directed and responding to Israel, but also about Bay Area Judaism. And as a result, I'm going to make 2 requests. First, we're going to move swiftly, as large crowds of Jews often do, past the food, but grab a bite. As you walk out that door, just because JCC is very busy today, you're going to walk out that door to either go upstairs. There are 2 sessions going upstairs. Tamar Zaken, an expert in Mizrahi texts, offering some thoughts on Jewish rebuilding and reunification of Jerusalem. Rabbi Adina Allen, who is the director of the Jewish Studio Project, which is a really innovative organization that is based here in the Bay, and Mark Dollinger, who will be in Fisher Hall, which you'll walk around and is over here, doing stuff on Jewish, Black responses to 1967. Also, the second part of that is talk to one another. They're a really amazing group of people here. So introduce yourselves, talk to one another, go learn more Torah. We'll be back in here at 12 for lunch.